Chapter 22. The Royal Family Kingdom. Men and brethren, let me freely speak unto you of the patriarch David, that he is both dead and buried, and his sepulchre is with us unto this day. Therefore, being a prophet, and knowing that God had sworn with an oath to him, that of the fruit of his according to the flesh, he would raise up Christ, to sit on this throne. Acts 2:29-30. Jesus was born to inherit the throne of the polygamist David. It was an inheritance of political dominion, and a royal blood inheritance which he never denied. And when Jesus was born, an angel came to Mary and said, Jesus shall have the throne of his father David, and he shall reign over the house of Jacob forever, and of his kingdom there shall be no end. Luke 1:32-33. Then came the wise men from the east to locate and pay tribute to the king of the Jews with treasures normally presented to kings. They also spoke to Herod the king, and said that Jesus would someday be the king of the Jews. This was not good news to the jealous Herod, and he was troubled. This, too, was the conclusion of all the chief priests, who said that it was thus written by the prophets. Herod organized a special hunting trip, and Jesus was the target. He sent orders to kill the children under 2 years old. See Matt. Chap. 2. Historians all agree that it was the male children that Herod had slain, not being fearful that a woman would take over his throne. The renowned historian and theologian, Farrar, said that Herod issued his fell mandate to slay all the male children of Bethlehem and its neighborhood from 2 years old and under. Farrar's Life of Christ, page 30, also an earlier historian named Macrobius, living in the 3rd century, stated that among the boys under 2 years of age, whom Herod ordered to be slain in Syria, his own son also had been slain. Ibid. The massacre of so many male children created a great surplus of women who were the same age as Jesus. This same situation had occurred in the days of Moses. This abundant supply of women would have been an opportunity for Jesus and his apostles to live the law of plural marriage. Jesus was born of the lineage of David through Bathsheba, whom we know was a polygamist. Polygamous marriages were valid and lawful in the sight of God, or we must deny that Christ is the legal descendant of David. The scriptures clearly inform us that a bastard, or one who is corruptly born, is not a son, nor has the rights and honors of a legitimate son. So when Paul writes saying, "Then are ye bastards and not sons," Heb. 12:18, he infers a bastard has no legitimate claim on the hereditary line of Israel. To receive the honors and titles that Jesus did as a king, see Matt. 21:5, Christ had the title and therefore legally claimed it according to the lawful and inheritable rights of that seed, according to the flesh. See Rom. 1:3, this claim was through a polygamous line and was honored by the Jews. It was his kingly and priestly powers which brought about the envy of both pagan and Jew. His influence was felt in every domain of social, religious, and political life, and soon caused the jealousy and fear of those who felt the sting of his rebuke, for Jesus exposed the corruptions of the political tyrants and the religious demigods. Jesus did not make an exception in obeying any of the laws of God, and therefore it is only plausible that he would have obeyed the laws as given to Moses and lived plural marriage. Matthew, Mark, and Luke mention the many women that followed Jesus. They also wrote that they ministered unto him of their substance. They were giving him means to complete his work and mission in life, as though they were obeying the command of God that said, "Thy desire shall be to thy husband, and he shall rule over thee." If this would have been a general giving of gifts, then we would have read that both men and women were giving of their substance to him, but these women were acting as helpmates to him. This band of women also followed him to Calvary for the crucifixion and to the sepulchre. And many women were there beholding afar off, which followed Jesus from Galilee, ministering unto him. Matt. 27:55. There were also women looking on afar off, among whom was Mary Magdalene, and Mary the mother of James the Less and of Oseas and Salome, who also, when he was in Galilee, followed him, and ministered unto him, and many other women which came up with him unto Jerusalem. Mark 15:40-41. Luke says that there were women who followed him to the cross. They prepared spices and ointments for his burial, and they came to the sepulchre to dress his body. See Luke 23:55-56, 24:1-3. Now then, according to Jewish traditional laws, only members of the immediate family are permitted to attend to the body and enter the sepulchre of the deceased. These women could have been the mother, sisters, and wives of Jesus. The very nature and intent of God giving wives to the ancient prophets would also be reason to give wives to Jesus. One of the purposes of Jesus' life was to understand the feelings, the sufferings, and the trials of all men. He must know the love, the family ties, and the grief of losing honorable wives in death as the ancient prophets did. How could Jesus know the feelings and emotions of those ancient prophets who had lived plural marriage, with all of their trials and joys, the love and the sorrows connected therewith, unless he in like manner had obeyed the same laws and commandments from God? For years before Christ's coming, the Jews believed in a Messiah who would have children. The Messiah will die, and his son will become king in his stead, and there will be no immortality, but the people will live much longer. The Messiah idea in Jewish history, Greenstone, page 147. Furthermore, a king must have successors to his title and inheritance. For a king to die without an heir is not only a disgrace, but it is a mark of divine disapproval. From the testimony of Isaiah, Christ lived to have children and see them. Said he, "But he was wounded for our transgressions, he was bruised for our iniquities. The chastisement of our peace was upon him, and with his stripes we are healed. Yet it pleased the Lord to bruise him, he hath put him to grief. When thou shalt make his soul an offering for sin, he shall see his seed, he shall prolong his days, and the pleasure of the Lord shall prosper in his hand. He shall see of the travail of his soul, and shall be satisfied." Isa 53 5 10 11. When a person sees his own children, he is seeing his seed. This is what Isaiah said would be the privilege of the Messiah. Would God say that it is pleasing in his sight for righteous men during the time of Abraham or Moses to live the principle of polygamy and raise large families, but that in a different time they couldn't? Would God be more tolerant of the wicked raising children in wickedness in Christ's time, but was intolerant of them to do so when Moses was alive? It is only reasonable that God should check the increase of the wicked, and at the same time increase the families of the righteous. There are 16 to 18 books of the Old Testament that are entirely silent in regard to the practice of plural marriage, and there are 8 writers of the New Testament that did not mention it. That does not mean that during the time in which those books were written, it was not practiced or that it was not permitted. Man's honor and glory is obtained by woman. Alone and single, man fades into insignificance, but through women and children, his glory is extended and perpetuated. For this reason Paul said that the woman is the glory of the man. I Cor. 11:7. Jesus was not the exception to this principle. Before he died, he said to the Father, "Father, the hour has come, glorify thy Son, that thy Son may also glorify thee. I have glorified thee on the earth. I have finished the work which thou gavest me to do." John 17:1-4. Isaiah the prophet saw the Messiah seated upon the throne of the temple. In the year that King Uzziah died, I saw also the Lord sitting upon a throne, high and lifted up, and his train filled the temple. Isa 6:1. In this instance the train was not a robe, for it filled the temple. This train implies more than just disciples. The term referred to relations or family members. This was also the interpretation by Paul, who says concerning Jesus, "Verily he took not on him the nature of angels, but he took on him the seed of Abraham." Heb 2:16. Abraham the polygamist, being a friend of God, the Messiah chose to take upon himself his seed, and by marrying many honorable wives himself, showed to all future generations that he approbated the plurality of wives under the Christian dispensation, as well as under the dispensations in which his polygamist ancestors lived. In the light of new revelation and new archaeological findings, these little-known facts are finding their way to discovery. In 1875, an archaeologist by the name of Gano discovered these facts in ancient records. The written commentary of the learned Ms. Viadli are most revealing. Did Jesus have children? There seems to be evidence that such was the case. In 1873, M. Clermont Ganneau discovered near Bethany on the Mount of Offense certain sarcophagi of extremely ancient times. On these were small crosses, but none of the usual symbols of Jewish burials, which leaves no doubt of the religion of the persons whose remains were preserved in them. M. Clermont Ganneau, writing of these discoveries in the Palestine Exploration Fund Quarterly, 1874, pages 7 to 10, notes the following to have been buried there: Salome, wife of Judah, Judah, son of Elazar, Lazarus, Elazar, the son of Nathan, Martha, daughter of Pesach, Simeon, son of Jesus, Salamzian, daughter of Simeon. Other sarcophagi had been destroyed earlier. Concerning them writes Clermont Ganneau, "By singular coincidence, which from the first struck me very forcibly, these inscriptions, found close to the Bethany road, and very near the site of the village, contain nearly all the names of the personages in the gospel scene which belonged to the place: Elazar, Lazarus, Simon, Martha. A host of other coincidences occur at the site of all these evangelical names. The Simeon, son of Jesus, was called in one of the inscriptions the priest, H. Cohen, and M. Clermont Ganneau concluded, The Simeon might very well be the second bishop of Jerusalem. But then would arise the grave question of the marriage of Christian priests, since Simeon has a daughter named Salamzian M. Clermont-Ganneau's French name suggests him to be Catholic and bound to the doctrines of celibacy. However, the first 15 bishops of Jerusalem were circumcised Jews, and the earlier ones, at least, certainly obeyed the marriage commandments. LT seems the only reason Clermont-Ganneau did not candidly state his beliefs was the question of a married clergy, for throughout his article, he suggests this Simeon to have been the Bishop of Jerusalem. He promised to write a complete paper on the subject when he had more carefully examined all the find. LT was an important find from the standpoint of archaeology, for it was the first actual discovery of the name Martha, which would alone be sufficient to make this collection important from an exegetic point of view. Yet, his promise paper was never published. Why? Was it because a full study of the find disclosed that the Simeon, the son of Jesus, was the Bishop of Jerusalem? I fully believe this to be the case. Orthodox Christians have purposely destroyed valuable historical evidences which would prove embarrassing to them. That such was probably the case here is suggested by the fact that several ancient writers imply that Simeon, the Bishop of Jerusalem and President of the Church, died c. 106 AD, was of the family of Jesus. It would be only natural for Jesus' son, when he was old enough to succeed James, the brother of the Lord, on his death, to the presidency of the Church. In all probability Simeon was a son of Jesus and Martha, and was that child who appeared at the crucifixion. Ems Viodli, Ph.D., Truth, 13-253. A Greek writer named Celsus, who lived in the 2nd century AD, wrote a great deal about Christianity. In his writing called True Discourse, he was critical of Christianity and its doctrines, but one of the reasons he objected to Christ was because he had so many wives. It was said that Celsus was the first pagan who denounced Christianity, and in his work The True Word, he attempted not only to refute, but to ridicule the doctrine of Christianity. Jewish Encyclopedia 3637, it is a work of some significance to Christians because his True Discourse is the oldest literary attack on Christianity, of which the details have survived. We know of it from Origen's reply, Contra Celsum, in 8 books, which dates from the 3rd century, and preserves about 9/10 of the discourse. Oxford Dictionary of the Christian Church, page 260. Celsus contends that Jesus kept all the Jewish customs, and even took part in their sacrifices. Contra Celsum, Origen, page 71. However, in the Judaic writings we find the clearest and most forceful denunciation of celibacy and barrenness. They say simply that marriage is a duty and celibacy is a sin, and he that does not marry causes the image of God to be diminished, and the divine presence to withdraw from Israel. Yeb. 63b, 64a. The ancient prophet Isaiah wrote more about the promised Redeemer than any other prophet. Among his writings was the prophecy that the Savior would live to see his own children. He said, "When thou shalt make his soul an offering for sin, he shall see his seed." Isaiah 53:10. This scripture indicates that when Jesus would be at the cross of crucifixion, he would see his children, which no doubt did occur, making his offering more heartrending and the trial more severe. At the cross were many women bewailing and lamented him, but Jesus said, "Weep not for me, but weep for yourselves and for your children." Luke 23:29. These no doubt were his wives and children, fulfilling this prophecy of Isaiah. Paul said that Jesus took upon him the seed of Abraham, Heb. 2:16, which means that he continued the lineage and posterity of Abraham. The apostles followed the example of their master. For instance, John, the beloved disciple, writes in his 2nd epistle, "Unto the elect lady and her children, whom I love in the truth." Again, he says, "Having many things to write unto you, I would not write with paper and ink, but I trust to come unto you, and speak face to face, that our joy may be full." Again, "The children of thy elect sister greet thee." Some ancient and modern philosophers say John is talking about his wife or wives. Paul says, "Mine answer to them that do examine me is this." Have we not power to lead about a sister, a wife, as well as other apostles, and as the brethren of the Lord, and Cephas? This may also infer plural wives. In the days of ancient Israel there was a constant stream of plagues, wars and calamities, causing great loss of young men and warriors. Many of those young and valiant men who died in the cause of Israel were not to be forgotten, nor were their names to be held no more in remembrance before the Lord. In fact, they were often held all the more revered because when these young men fell in war, the dead brother continued his name and his posterity in remembrance before God and Israel. This custom in ancient times was also practiced by the patriarchs. Then when Moses came, it was reiterated and was established firmly in the laws of God through Moses. We observe that when Christ came, this law was still in force. There was no abolishment or changing, nor was anything introduced that prevented that ancient law of God from being practiced at the time of Christ. Was there anything in the teachings of Christ or his apostles that abolished this law or changed it? Did Christ, as he went forth baptizing and teaching new converts, ever say anything about the law that required a brother to marry a deceased brother's widow? Not a word. Jesus did not say that Moses suffered a plurality of wives because of the hardness of their hearts, and that it was not so from the beginning. No, he said directly the reverse. LT was for putting away wives and for not taking wives that Jesus condemned them. Putting away wives was not only a condemnation by Christ and the apostles, but it was considered an evil for thousands of years before they made that announcement. There are certain evidences, then, which are apparent by their absence. 1. Of all the sins that Jesus condemned, he made no mention of plural marriage. 2. Jesus never condemned nor apologized for any of the ancient prophets who lived plural marriage. 3. Jesus saw many people in the Jewish community who had more than one wife, but he never chastised or corrected them for their marriages. 4. Jesus never instructed his apostles to condemn the practice of plural marriage. 5. Out of the several obligatory laws of Moses which pertain to plural marriage, Jesus never made any change in those laws. The New Testament never changed the laws of plural marriage in the Old Testament, so they were left in force by Christ. If any changes would have been made, they would have been equally explicit and just as positive in their renunciation. But such clear and definite changes are not to be found, neither is there any reason that such a change should be made. If plural marriage would have been a sin, it is certain that Jesus and his apostles would not have been afraid to speak against it. We must also ask that if Jesus had not been married and had not had children, then why don't Christians not get married and not have children, if they believe he was perfect and they should follow him? Jesus was born in the lineage of kings. He was honored and called a king of kings, and a king of the Jews. He had the responsibility of the throne of David. John the Baptist also announced the coming of that kingdom. When he was hailed before the Romans, it was for the charge of being a king. His accusers said, "We found this fellow perverting the nation, and forbidding to give tribute to Caesar, saying that he himself is Christ a king." Luke 23:2, when they brought him before Pilate. Pilate therefore said unto him, Art thou a king then? Jesus answered, Thou sayest that I am a king. To this end was I born, and for this cause came I into the world, that I should bear witness unto the truth. John 18:37. They mocked him as a king by putting on him a purple robe, the royal robe of a king, and then for a king's crown, they put on his head a crown of thorns. On the cross of crucifixion was the inscription of his crime, a king. One of the thieves who hung beside him said, If he be the king of Israel, let him now come down from the cross. Jesus was guilty of being a king. He was honored as a king, he taught as a king, and he obeyed the laws of his birthright as a king. So Christ came through the lineage of Israel as a king, indeed as a king of kings. Though most of the tribes have become dispersed and their identity lost, Judah retained the lawful and hereditary family line. According to prophecy, the scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor a lawgiver from between his feet, until Shiloh, Messiah, the Christ, come. Gen. 49:10. This lineage of royal priesthood was based upon a polygamous line of ancestry. If Jesus did not marry and have children, then he failed as the true Messiah in the following ways. 1. He failed as a king by not continuing that lineage of royalty. No worse fate can befall a king than to have his posterity stop because of his failure to have a son to carry on the rights of that throne and genealogical line. 2. He failed as a patriarch in that patriarchal lineage of priesthood. 3. He failed in keeping the laws of Moses, which were to be a perpetual law kept by Israel's lineage. 4. He failed as a father, for every man was given the command to multiply and replenish the earth, and to continue that lineage and seed. If Jesus were a polygamist, then he obeyed all these laws and commandments according to law, inheritance and the priesthood.